Hello everyone, and welcome to our first lecture on the Common Technical Document Structure for Clinical Trials Applications submitted to Health Canada. I'm Professor Peivand Pirouzi, and today we're going to explore CTD Module 1 in detail. Module 1 is particularly significant because it's the only region-specific module in the entire CTD framework. While Modules 2 through 5 are harmonized internationally across ICH regions including Canada, the United States, Europe, and Japan, Module 1 contains administrative information that is unique to each regulatory authority. For Health Canada, Module 1 is where you'll include all the Canadian-specific forms, certifications, and administrative documents required under the Food and Drug Regulations. This module sets the administrative foundation for your entire clinical trials application. Think of Module 1 as your introduction to Health Canada. It's where reviewers first engage with your submission, and it needs to be meticulously prepared. A well-organized Module 1 facilitates a smooth review process, while a poorly prepared one can lead to screening deficiencies and unnecessary delays. In this lecture, we'll walk through each section of Module 1 as it applies to CTAs in Canada, understand what documents are required, and discuss best practices for preparing them according to Health Canada's expectations. By the end of this session, you'll have a clear roadmap for assembling this critical component of your CTA submission. Let's begin with an overview of Module 1 for Health Canada submissions. As I mentioned, this module is unique in the CTD structure because it varies by region. Module 1 for Health Canada contains all Canadian-specific administrative documents required under the Food and Drug Regulations, particularly Division 5 which governs clinical trials. These requirements are distinct from what you would submit to the FDA, EMA, or PMDA. The module includes regulatory forms specific to Health Canada, attestations and certifications required under Canadian law, and various administrative correspondence. Understanding these requirements is essential for anyone preparing CTAs for the Canadian market. Health Canada's requirements for Module 1 are outlined in their guidance documents, particularly the Clinical Trial Application Guidance and the ECTD Canadian Module 1 specification. These documents should be your primary references when preparing this module. Module 1 is your first point of contact with Health Canada. Before reviewers examine your non-clinical data or clinical protocols, they'll process your administrative package in Module 1. The quality and completeness of this module sets the tone for your entire submission. A CTA that fails screening due to Module 1 deficiencies wastes valuable time. Health Canada's screening process specifically checks for completeness of administrative requirements, so getting Module 1 right is essential for an efficient review. Now let's look at the structure of Module 1 for a Health Canada clinical trials application. The module is divided into several major sections. Section 1.1 contains the comprehensive table of contents. This master index covers your entire ECTD submission and allows reviewers to navigate efficiently through all 5 modules. Section 1.2 is where you'll place your application forms and administrative information. For a CTA, this includes the Health Canada Clinical Trial Application Form and various attestations and certifications required under Division 5. Section 1.3 contains product information. For a CTA, the primary document here is the investigator's brochure, which compiles all relevant information about the investigational drug for clinical investigators. Section 1.4 is for references, including any literature references or guidelines that support your application but aren't part of the core submission documents. Section 1.5 contains regional information specific to Canada. This is where Canada-specific requirements that don't fit elsewhere are placed. Section 1.6 contains the ECTD envelope information and submission metadata required for electronic processing of your application. Each of these sections has specific Health Canada requirements, and we're going to examine the most important ones in detail throughout this lecture. The Clinical Trial Application Form, also known as HC/SC 3011, is the cornerstone of your CTA submission to Health Canada. This form is mandatory for all clinical trial applications. The form serves several critical functions. First, it identifies the sponsor of the clinical trial. Under Canadian regulations, the sponsor is the entity that takes responsibility for the initiation, management, and financing of the clinical trial. Second, the form identifies the drug being studied, including its proper name, common name, and any code names used in development. For biologics or complex drugs, additional identification may be required. Third, the form specifies the submission type. Is this an initial CTA for a new trial? A CTA amendment modifying an existing authorization? Or a notification for certain changes that don't require prior authorization? The form also captures critical contact information for regulatory correspondence. Health Canada needs to know who to contact with questions or requests for additional information. The regulatory contact should be someone with authority to respond to Health Canada inquiries. The clinical trial application form must be signed by an authorized representative of the sponsor. In Canada, this is typically the senior medical or scientific officer or their delegate. The signature represents a commitment to conduct the trial in accordance with Canadian regulations and good clinical practice. Health Canada requires several attestations as part of the CTA submission. These attestations are formal declarations that certain requirements have been or will be met. The sponsor attestation regarding good clinical practice, or GCP, compliance is fundamental. The sponsor must attest that the clinical trial will be conducted in accordance with GCP guidelines, which are based on ICH 6. This attestation commits the sponsor to ethical and scientific standards. The attestation regarding protocol adherence confirms that the trial will be conducted according to the submitted protocol. Any significant deviations would require notification to Health Canada. Research Ethics Board approval is a critical requirement in Canada. The sponsor must attest that the protocol has been or will be reviewed and approved by a properly constituted REB before any Canadian subjects are enrolled. Note that REB approval isn't required before CTA submission, but it must be obtained before trial initiation. The Qualified Investigator Attestation confirms that each clinical trial site will be supervised by a qualified investigator who meets the requirements under Division 5. The QI must be a physician or, in certain circumstances, a dentist licensed to practice in the province where the trial site is located. The Informed Consent Attestation confirms that informed consent will be obtained from each trial subject before any trial-related procedures are performed. The consent process must comply with Canadian regulatory requirements and REB-approved procedures. Section 1.2.3 contains detailed sponsor information. Getting this right is essential for smooth communication with Health Canada. Complete sponsor identification includes the legal company name, address, and contact information. For clinical trials, Health Canada needs to know exactly who is taking responsibility for the trial. If the sponsor is located outside Canada, a Canadian representative must be designated. The Canadian representative acts as the sponsor's agent in Canada and must be authorized to act on the sponsor's behalf in all regulatory matters. This representative must have a Canadian address. The regulatory contact is the primary point of contact for Health Canada correspondence. This person should be knowledgeable about the submission and authorized to respond to Health Canada inquiries. Response times to Health Canada requests can affect your review timeline, so choose someone responsive. A medical or scientific contact should also be identified for safety-related matters. This is typically a physician who can discuss clinical aspects of the trial and respond to safety queries. 24-hour emergency contact information is required because safety issues can arise at any time. Health Canada needs to be able to reach the sponsor urgently if a serious safety concern emerges. This contact should have authority to take immediate action if needed. Section 1.2.4 contains information about the clinical trial sites where the study will be conducted in Canada. You must provide a list of all proposed Canadian clinical trial sites. Each site where subjects will be enrolled needs to be identified in your CTA. Sites cannot begin enrolling subjects until they're included in an authorized CTA. For each site, you must identify the qualified investigator. Under Division 5, the QI is the physician or dentist responsible for the conduct of the trial at that site. You'll need to provide their name, qualifications, and contact information. Site addresses and contact information allow Health Canada to know exactly where trial activities will occur. This information may also be relevant for GCP inspections. You must identify the Research Ethics Board responsible for each site. Different sites may use different REBs, and Health Canada needs to know which REB has oversight of each location. For multi-site trials using a central REB model, this should be clearly indicated. Site information can be updated through CTA amendments as your trial progresses. If you add new sites or change qualified investigators, you'll submit an amendment to update this information. The initial CTA doesn't need to include every site that might eventually participate. If your investigational drug will be shipped into Canada from another country, you'll need to address import authorization requirements in your CTA. The import authorization component identifies who will import the drug and the shipping arrangements. Under normal circumstances, importing drugs into Canada requires a drug establishment license. However, there are specific exemptions for drugs intended solely for clinical trials. Clinical trial drugs are exempt from certain establishment licensing requirements under Division 5, but this exemption must be properly documented. Your CTA should clearly indicate that the drug is for clinical trial use only and identify the parties involved in importation. If a drug establishment license holder will be involved in importation, distribution, or storage of the clinical trial material in Canada, they should be identified. Their DL number should be provided. Documentation of the supply chain helps Health Canada understand how the drug will move from manufacturing site to clinical trial sites. This includes identification of any intermediary storage or distribution facilities. For drugs manufactured in Canada for Canadian trials, import authorization isn't needed, but you still need to address the supply chain and any applicable establishment licensing requirements. Section 1.3 contains the Investigator's Brochure, or IB. This is a critical document for any clinical trials application. The Investigator's Brochure is a comprehensive compilation of clinical and non-clinical data on the investigational drug. It's designed to provide investigators and others involved in the trial with the information they need to understand the rationale for the study and to make informed decisions about patient care. Under Division 5 of the Food and Drug Regulations, an IB is required for all CTAs. The IB must be provided to each qualified investigator before the trial begins at their site. The content of the IB should follow ICHE 6 GCP guidance. It typically includes physical, chemical, and pharmaceutical properties of the drug, non-clinical pharmacology and toxicology summaries, clinical pharmacology, efficacy, and safety information from prior human experience, and guidance for investigators on managing the drug and monitoring subjects. The IB is a living document that must be updated as new information emerges during development. Significant new safety information, in particular, should trigger IB updates. Health Canada expects sponsors to maintain current IBs and to provide updates to investigators and to the agency when warranted. When preparing your CTA, ensure your IB is current and comprehensive. An outdated or incomplete IB can raise concerns during review. Section 1.4 contains references that support your clinical trials application but aren't part of the core submission documents. Published literature can provide important context for your clinical trial. If you're citing published studies to support your rationale, safety assessment, or study design, include those publications in this section. Relevant regulatory guidelines may be referenced if they inform your approach. For example, if Health Canada has issued specific guidance on clinical trials in your therapeutic area, you might reference it here. If you're cross-referencing another submission to Health Canada, the details go here. For example, if you have a drug master file on file with Health Canada that contains proprietary manufacturing information, you would reference that DMF. Letters of authorization are needed when referencing data owned by another party. If you're relying on a DMF holder's data or another sponsor submission, you need written authorization to reference that information. Other supporting scientific documentation that doesn't fit in the main CTD modules might be included here. Use this section judiciously for material that genuinely supports your application but doesn't belong elsewhere. Section 1.5 contains regional information specific to Canada that doesn't fit neatly into other Module 1 sections. Labeling and packaging information for clinical trial supplies is important. In Canada, clinical trial materials must be labeled appropriately, and bilingual requirements apply. Labels must be in both English and French if the trial includes sites in Quebec or if materials might be used in French-speaking contexts. Canadian labeling requirements for clinical trials are somewhat different from commercial products, but essential information must still be present. This includes the statement that the drug is for clinical trial use only, the protocol number, and appropriate handling instructions. Evidence of good manufacturing practices compliance for the drug product and drug substance may be included here. While detailed CMC information goes in Module 3, evidence that manufacturing occurs at GMP-compliant facilities supports your application. If any drug establishment license holders are involved in manufacturing, packaging, labeling, or importing the clinical trial materials, their DL information should be provided. If you've had previous interactions with Health Canada regarding this drug or development program, such as pre-CTA meetings or previous submissions, reference those interactions here. This provides context for reviewers and demonstrates engagement with the regulatory process. Let me provide context on the regulatory framework governing clinical trials applications in Canada. Division 5 of Part C of the Food and Drug Regulations is the primary regulation. Division 5 governs the sale and importation of drugs for use in clinical trials involving human subjects. It establishes the legal framework for conducting clinical trials in Canada, including the requirement for authorization before a trial can begin. The default review period for a new clinical trials application is 25 calendar days. If Health Canada doesn't issue a not satisfactory letter or request clarification within this period, the CTA is deemed authorized by default. However, you should not rely on default authorization, engage with any Health Canada requests promptly. CTA amendments and notifications have a shorter 7-day review period. Amendments are used for significant changes that require Health Canada review before implementation. Notifications are for changes that can be implemented immediately but must be communicated to Health Canada. Division 5 also defines the responsibilities of key parties. The sponsor is responsible for initiating, managing, and financing the trial. The qualified investigator is responsible for conduct at each site. Research ethics boards provide independent ethical oversight. Understanding these defined responsibilities is essential for compliance. When preparing your CTA, ensure you understand Division 5 requirements thoroughly. Non-compliance can result in not satisfactory letters or even suspension of authorization. Understanding Health Canada's CTA review process helps you prepare better submissions. Let me walk through what happens after you submit. Initial screening checks your submission for administrative completeness. Health Canada verifies that all required forms are present, attestations are included, and the CTD structure is valid. Submissions that fail screening are rejected and must be resubmitted. Scientific review examines the safety data supporting the proposed trial and evaluates the clinical protocol. Reviewers assess whether the non-clinical and any clinical data adequately support the proposed human exposure, and whether the protocol includes appropriate safety monitoring. There are several possible outcomes. A satisfactory letter means your CTA is authorized and you can proceed with the trial. A not satisfactory letter, or NSL, means significant deficiencies were identified and authorization is refused. You may also receive requests for clarification or additional information. The 25-day review clock starts when Health Canada receives your submission. Any time spent waiting for sponsor responses to clarification requests typically stops the clock, so prompt responses are essential. The importance of a complete initial submission cannot be overstated. A well-prepared CTA that anticipates reviewer questions and provides comprehensive information is much more likely to proceed smoothly than one that requires multiple rounds of clarification. Health Canada requires all clinical trials applications to be submitted in CTD format. Understanding the technical requirements is essential for successful submission. The CTD format is mandatory. Paper submissions are not accepted for CTAs. Your submission must comply with Health Canada's CTD specifications, which align with ICH standards but include Canada-specific elements. The Canadian Module 1 specification defines the structure and content requirements for Module 1 in Canadian submissions. This specification identifies which documents go in which folders and how they should be named. Following this specification is essential for passing validation. The XML backbone is the technical heart of your CTD submission. It defines the structure of your submission and links all documents together. The XML must be valid according to Health Canada's schema, and the folder structure must match the backbone. PDFs in your submission must meet specific formatting standards. Documents should be text searchable, properly bookmarked for navigation, and formatted according to Health Canada's PDF specifications. Poor PDF quality can impede review. Before submitting, validate your CTD against Health Canada's validation criteria. Invalid submissions will be rejected at the gateway and won't enter review. Many sponsors use commercial CTD publishing software that includes validation tools. Let me discuss common deficiencies in Module 1 submissions that can lead to screening failure or not satisfactory letters. Missing or incomplete attestations are frequently cited. Health Canada requires specific attestations about GCP compliance, REB approval, informed consent, and other matters. If any required attestation is missing or doesn't address all required elements, the CTA may be rejected. Unsigned or improperly signed forms cause problems. The clinical trial application form and attestations must be signed by authorized individuals. Electronic signatures must meet applicable requirements. Missing signatures are an easy problem to avoid but surprisingly common. Inadequate qualified investigator information can trigger clarification requests. Each QI must be identified with sufficient information to verify their qualifications. Missing medical license numbers or incomplete contact information are common issues. Foreign sponsors sometimes forget to designate a Canadian representative. If your company isn't located in Canada, you must have a Canadian representative, and their information must be complete. An outdated investigator's brochure suggests the sponsor isn't maintaining current safety information. The IB should reflect current knowledge about the drug. If your IB is more than a year old and no updates have occurred, reviewers may question whether it's current. Careful attention to these common issues during submission preparation can prevent many problems. Let me share some best practices for preparing Module 1 of your clinical trials application. Always use Health Canada's current templates and forms. These are available on the Health Canada website and are updated periodically. Using outdated forms can cause problems, so verify you have the latest versions before preparing your submission. Ensure all attestations are complete and properly signed before submission. Create a checklist of required attestations and verify each one. Have someone other than the preparer review attestations for completeness. If you're a foreign sponsor, verify that your Canadian representative designation is complete and current. The representative should be informed of their responsibilities and prepared to respond to Health Canada on your behalf. Keep your investigator's brochure current. Review it before each CTA submission to ensure it reflects the latest safety and efficacy information. If updates are needed, complete them before submission rather than promising future updates. Always validate your CTD submission before sending it to Health Canada. Technical validation failures result in immediate rejection. Build validation into your submission process, not as an afterthought. Consider engaging with Health Canada through a pre-CTA meeting if your development program is complex or novel. These meetings can help you understand Health Canada's expectations and avoid problems in your submission. Let's wrap up today's lecture with key takeaways about CTD Module 1 for Health Canada clinical trials applications. Module 1 is the region-specific module containing all Canada-specific administrative documents. Unlike Modules 2 through 5, this content is unique to Health Canada and must comply with Canadian regulatory requirements. The clinical trial application form and required attestations are mandatory components. These documents establish the administrative and legal framework for your trial. Missing or deficient forms and attestations are common causes of screening failure. The investigator's brochure is an essential component of every CTA. It provides investigators with the information they need to conduct the trials safely and must be kept current throughout development. Division 5 of the Food and Drug Regulations is the governing regulation for clinical trials in Canada. Understanding Division 5 requirements, including sponsor responsibilities, QI requirements, and REB oversight, is essential for compliance. A complete, well-prepared submission enables Health Canada's 25-day review to proceed efficiently. Investing time in thorough preparation of Module 1 pays dividends in avoiding delays and clarification requests. In our next lecture, we'll move to Module 2, which contains the common technical document summaries. These summaries bridge the administrative content in Module 1 with the detailed scientific data in Modules 3 through 5. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you next time.